Real life. I'm here with John Kelleher. Sorry. Hi, John.
Hi.
How
Thanks
are
for
you?
having me. Doing well.
My pleasure. John is a contributor at DXdao, and you're gonna talk about the emerging decentralized tech stack. So yeah, the stage is yours, John.
Thank you. And yes, to add a little bit to that, I've been working in blockchain for about 4 years now. Full-time, I've been a contributor at DXdao for the past year and a half. These days, I'm pretty active in software development with DXdao, and very excited to talk today to 0x Hack about the emerging decentralized tech stack and what we're using to build and deploy, host our applications, and interact with blockchain and Web3. So the goal here today for this talk, just give a sense of where we are with decentralized application development. I think it's super nascent field and a lot of things are still being sorted out. The UX is not terribly great for the users in a lot of cases, and often what we're doing today is not super decentralized either. But I wanted to try to kind of put a lens on how we got to where we are, like how things stand today, where DXdao in particular is in this process, and also like where I see things going in the near term and in the future. So to zoom out a little bit, if anybody is a developer here or at all interested in crypto, I think the first thing I recommend to anyone is to read the Bitcoin white paper. And Bitcoin really kicked things off. It kind of shook things up, introducing this idea of having peer-to-peer electronic cash. That narrative has shifted a bit now to be more digital gold, but the original white paper is peer-to-peer electronic cash. And okay, I was just checking the messages, but yeah. So I think Bitcoin really sets the stage, and is in the white paper. I think is a super important document. I think it's going to go down in history with the Magna Carta. It's 8 pages long. It's very elegant, and it really gives you kind of a great sense of what this technology set out to do and what it's about. And so you fast forward a few years, we start to see efforts from people to build applications on Bitcoin. And Vitalik Buterin, who kind of pushed the initial ideas with Ethereum, wrote the initial white paper and stuff. He was trying to build applications of Bitcoin and realized how difficult that was. And thus the idea for Ethereum was born. 2015 it launched, and then people started building on Ethereum, and then that brings us to fast forward a few more years. We've gone through a couple market cycles. The development has gone from just a few like simple smart contracts that can launch ICOs and track token balances to more complicated applications, including the whole DeFi space with lending, exchange, etc., as well as governance and ways to vote and achieve consensus in a decentralized way on chain. And maybe even more impressively, we actually have decentralized applications that are fairly usable today. And so that starts to kind of crack open this whole new Web3 space that kind of goes beyond just blockchain and finding kind of consensus around value. And so we'll talk a little bit. Yeah, I think this is just important to set the stage. So to kind of jump into where we are today and like kind of how I started in the blockchain space is with like smart contracts. So in 2017, and kind of like the middle of that bull market is when I got involved in a lot of what we were initially doing is helping projects build smart contracts. There really weren't many dApps as we know them today. At that time, there really weren't any, and so you just had the ability to do some cool stuff with smart contracts. And so that's a really important thing to understand. The Ethereum virtual machine is kind of the software that is executing all of these smart contracts in the Ethereum world, and Solidity is the language that is most popular, although there are other languages such as Viper that compile down to EVM bytecode and you could use. And so like the key characteristics here of blockchain or smart contracts, now we have they're immutable, right? So they will not change once you deploy them, right? Deployed smart contracts can't change. Now there's a caveat there that some development teams achieve upgradability for their applications by using a certain design pattern, which allows you to deploy new smart contracts and update pointing where they go to. But yeah, in general, these like smart contracts are immutable, right? So they are permanent as long as the blockchain is alive. Distributed with the blockchain itself, you have the thousands of Ethereum nodes that are broadcasting transactions to the network, and the full nodes, et cetera, that are storing all the data. And metered, this is an important thing to understand with blockchain development, is that everything you do, all the operations in terms of writing to the blockchain are cost something, right? So you have to pay, and this is where the concept of gas comes in. You need to kind of pay based on the level of computation you are kind of paying for from the blockchain. Now reading doesn't cost anything, because once you have the blockchain downloaded, it's trivial to actually just read from it. So smart contracts are at the core, but then if we zoom out a little bit here, like what is kind of the big picture with what we're doing and what's going on? It's much more than just Ethereum or just even blockchains, right? So if you hear the term Web3, what does that really mean? And I think it's important to take a look at, and ask what is Web 1 and Web 2. So the context here is Web 1 is the early internet, like 80s, 90s, even early 2000s, primarily just sharing information and plain hypertext. It's read only, right? So you're just kind of consuming information from the web. It's kind of unidirectional for the most part, right? Web 2 we see really rise in the 2000s, and that's kind of what we have and are used to today. And now the key thing here is it's read and write. So that allows interactivity. So you have databases backing all these applications on the web. Now, anything, things you might think of there are marketplaces, eBay, Amazon, social media like Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, etc. Right? So that's all Web 2, key thing being that we're able to interact with it. But now Web 3, what's the big deal here? What's changing? And the new piece is this concept of trust, or as Chris Dixon at A16Z likes to say, trust is the best Lego. And I also, in preparation for this talk, I watched Juan Benet's talk at the Web3 Summit from 1 or 2 years ago, and it's on the Web3 Foundation's website. I recommend checking that out. It really helped me frame a lot of this. And yeah, so like trust is kind of the new thing, and that is rooted kind of all around verifiability. So the fact that you don't need to rely on these centralized service providers, middle people such as the companies, Facebook, Google, Amazon, Apple, like all these centralized companies that store and commoditize your data, right? Really, they make a product out of you in the Web 2 model, and a lot of that's driven by advertising, right? And that's so like advertising is like the business model of Web 2. It turns you and your data into product and commoditizes you, and also creates this, like maybe to most people not that much of a problem because the services are great and hey, it works, but it creates a dependence on these centralized parties. And in a sense, that's scary because now they're entrusted with a lot of information. And it's just, I think there's better ways that we can do things with Web3. So so verifiability is at the core of Web3. So we can in the long term here, I think what will happen is we'll turn all these centralized applications that we have today in Web 2 into applications that are built on and powered by decentralized protocols. In other words, it's kind of doing to all kinds of like web services that we're used to today that are built on centralized systems, like breaking them up and doing to them what Bitcoin like accomplishes with money, right? With value store and transfer on the internet. So the big things here: trustless infrastructure, right? Like, so the applications and software that you're using is not run by an individual party that you have to trust. You can basically believe that the network will always be up and running. So you see that today with blockchains such as Ethereum, right? There is no single party that can shut down Ethereum. Ethereum has had basically 100% uptime, with the caveat that the gas costs can go up from time to time. But yeah, Ethereum has had this 100% uptime basically since it's launched, and removing intermediaries, right? So like removing those trusted parties that we have today and giving users ownership of their data so that we can basically change the economic forces that drive interactions on the web. Less from an advertising profit motive, driving the way applications work, to user-controlled, user-owned applications and data that can form kind of new economies and ways of us interacting. So yeah, so as a developer, you are going to want to dig in a bit to what these technologies are and what you can do with them. So I wanted to kind of give a little bit of an overview of what we have today. So I've mentioned obviously Ethereum quite a bit. Now I put it under storage because if you think about it, blockchain is sort of a database, right? It's a very expensive but powerful database in the sense that it achieves this kind of trustlessness and immutability. Now, there are several projects, a few of which I list here, like IPFS and Filecoin, Arweave, Sia, and their project Skynet, which help with decentralized storage, right? So if you are looking to host content for a website or host a decentralized database or just host content in a decentralized way, these are the types of applications that are going, types of protocols rather, that are going to power that. Now, so that's important. That's kind of like your Web3 backend in a way, right? Like, so maybe you're used to developing with Postgres and Web2. Well, now you're going to be using these technologies instead, and your SQL queries may be less relevant here, but it's still good to know, good knowledge. And so if we look at the actual dApp development, like what you're interacting with when you use, for example, decentralized finance today with applications like Compound or Uniswap, what kind of technologies are really like enabling that and being used to build these decentralized applications? dApps. Sometimes people don't want to use the word dApp, so they'd rather just say applications. dApps is something that gets used a lot. So we have the graph is a rather new technology that I'd say powers almost all of, not all of them, but like most applications in decentralized finance that you use today. So I'll talk a little bit more about that, but in terms of like when you're developing it, you're probably going to be using, one of these libraries that provide an API to the Ethereum like RPC, so Web3.js or Ethers.js. Hardhat helps with running a local test net and doing deployments and managing all that. There's other technologies that you can use. Truffle was very popular. I see more people using Hardhat as well. So when you get into development, you're going to be writing, and you probably, and I have a Ethereum lens. There are plenty of other blockchains as well in different languages and stuff. So, keep in mind that I have my own view on this, and it's very difficult to even keep up with this, the project that I'm working on, let alone all the innovation happening in this space. So there's other blockchains, other technologies that you might find yourself using. But if you're in Ethereum or EVM inspired or blockchains, which is quite a few of them at this point, right? Like you will be using Solidity probably to write smart contracts, Web3 JS or Ethers JS to interact with those smart contracts in your decentralized application, like in your front end, and you can use whatever web stack. Typically, I see people using React.js, so like JavaScript basically on the front end. And then Hard Hat will help you kind of run the full thing end to end locally on like a test net instance of the blockchain on your local computer. Now you don't need the graph to build a decentralized application. Some of them, some applications don't use it. Like Uniswap actually, when you go to the exchange, doesn't use the graph. But if you go to the statistics site for Uniswap, that uses the graph. And that becomes really important because the graph is basically this caching layer to help store and serve up data from a blockchain that would otherwise take an extremely long time to load, right? So the graph is basically solving this pretty critical usability problem for Web3 applications that are interacting with blockchains, right? So what we see is it started out rather centralized, and I think that's important to understand, but the graph is working on becoming more decentralized, having various nodes actually run this caching layer and serve the data. So that's good, and hopefully we'll see continued progress towards the graph becoming more decentralized. It's definitely a project to dig into as well. And then finally, I want to talk about, okay, like how do we browse these applications? How does the user get to them and see them? Now it's possible to host these applications in a traditional way that you would, like, on a .com with DNS, and it's serving them up in a web server on Amazon AWS, or using a service on top of that like Heroku, etc. Right? So it's basically possible to build dApps just like you would any other application on Web2, deploy them, and they can interact with the blockchain. But that's not the whole picture, and it doesn't give us all the tools that we need and that the user needs, and it's also not necessarily as decentralized as we would like for different reasons. So typically a user is going to have a wallet like Metamask, right? But Metamask in a way is a browser because it allows your individual address that you have the private keys for to connect with the decentralized web, right? So all these decentralized applications, and in order to allow you to do anything with them, you need to have your own private public key pair, your own address. You have to have cryptocurrencies on that to pay for the gas, etc. Right? So applications like Metamask, so it's a Chrome extension or a browser extension, enable you to do that. And so Metamask is really the primary browser extension. There have been other attempts to do, there are other wallets that don't operate as a browser extension that you can sign up for, etc., and will work without the extension. But even now, Coinbase is moving towards the browser extension, and I think Metamask has achieved quite a bit of popularity. So I think that is probably here to stay. We'll see. And then there's actual web browsers themselves, like Brave, which are learning to interact with blockchain natively. And the other technology I wanted to point out here on the browsing front is ENS. So this is Ethereum name service, and this allows people to, addresses on Ethereum, which are owned by people or could be owned by a collection of people, to actually control domain names, right? So they're .eth, .eth is the top level domain for ENS. And when you buy and own an ENS domain, I could have John Kelleher.eth. I don't actually, but I could buy that. And then I could use that to ask people to send to my name. I could use it to sign transactions, and so that people would know who I am when they see my name on Etherscan or whatnot. But it also allows you to set a field called a content hash, and that's going to be relevant in later slides as I describe how DXdao is doing deployment today. Cool. Let's see. We'll move on here. So another key piece of decentralized tech, I think, is actually DAOs. So the organizations themselves, the organizations that are building these applications. So I think to really achieve the goals of Web3, it's going to be important to have internet native, blockchain native organizations building and operating these applications. So one of the things that Juan Benet said in his talk is the internet is becoming a nation. So if you look at DXdao, I think it's a great example of an Ethereum native organization. So the governance, the consensus is all done through voting on Ethereum. The treasury is held on Ethereum. And the applications are controlled using Ethereum. Now, DXdao is also deploying on other chains, so it's not exclusive to Ethereum. DXdao has also deployed what it calls a base, like a new governance system on the Dxdow chain, as well as some of its applications and some of its treasury has been bridged over to the Dxdow chain. But as a very decentralized focused DAO, I think Ethereum will always be an important piece of infrastructure for DXdao, and something that we're looking forward to very excitedly is the launch of the layer 2s that will hopefully help with scalability. So yeah, so let's talk a little bit and unpack this a bit. So earlier I said that verifiability is at the core of Web3. So I think that's a great lens to look at how DXdao works. So if you look at how governance works with DXdao, and governance is basically controlling the latter two things here, right? It's controlling spending from the treasury, and it's controlling the deployment of applications to domains that the DXdao owns, right? So when this voting happens, it's verifiable in a trustless way using the votes cast onto the Ethereum blockchain. And I also want to point out that what you see a lot of projects doing today is using a tool, and it's a great tool, it's called Snapshot, that allows users to sign messages and basically cast their vote through Snapshot. And what that has enabled is people to be able to vote without spending the gas costs that it would cost on Ethereum to vote. And to be fair, the cost of doing pretty much anything on Ethereum these days has become quite expensive, and that can be prohibitive for governance. But it's important to be mindful of the compromise that is being made when organizations are using the Snapshot tool, right? So we're actually losing some very important verifiability, right? So yeah, I can, it's still users who control their own private key signing messages on the Snapshot app, but where is that information being stored? It's being stored on a database controlled by the team that runs Snapshot, and you are essentially trusting that they're conveying that information in the correct way to whoever actually has the execution power for those organizations, treasury, et cetera, right? And it's usually a multi-sig of some kind, right? So there's this centralized intermediary in the form of the Snapshot product and team. And then these projects are also having to trust the multi-sigs to actually follow through and execute on the proposals that are passed on Snapshot, right? So so we're lacking we're compromising a little bit when projects are using Snapshot on the verifiability, on the trustlessness of how that works. Now, DXdao doesn't use Snapshot, and so to control the treasury, it still has to be votes directly cast on Ethereum. I won't go into this today, but one of the things that helps keep that cost under control to an extent is this feature of the DAO stack governance platform that DXdao is built on called Holographic Consensus. It's basically a way to filter and boost proposals. And when I say boost, that means like enable them to be executed, like passed and executed without having, with a dynamic quorum, basically, so that you don't always have to have the same number of people all voting on every application, all casting votes. So that's a feature that helps. But even DXdao has had to do some compromise. So daily operations, like paying individual workers and doing smaller operational tasks, has been moved for the time being to the XDAI chain, which is a proof of authority chain that's very Ethereum friendly, but is a separate chain, right? So we bridge things over. People get paid on DxDow. It's a little less trustless because there's a small set of validators on DxDow, but it gets the job done and it lets operations happen while DxDow still retains its treasury on the main chain in Ethereum. So yeah, so treasury spending is a big function here. But now I also want to talk a little bit about the ENS domains and applications. How does DXdao control and own applications? How does a DAO on Ethereum, which is really just an address that a bunch of people can control through voting, like basically the will of this address can be expressed by the voters that have some kind of voting power in that DAO. How does that address control applications in Web3, right? So this is where ENS is really cool and an important part of how DXdao deploys. So like I said, addresses on Ethereum can own ENS names. DXdao owns a whole bunch of ENS names. To take, for example, one of its products, Omen, which is a prediction market platform. Omen.eth is the domain name for that application. And so what happens when DXdao wants to deploy is the developers working for DXdao make a new build of the Omen application, and then they announce a release. It's for now on GitHub, and here's an important verifiability note, right? When a release is done by the dev teams for DXdao, it's very important that you have a reproducible hash of that build so that anybody can verify that the build that was announced and released by the dev team being paid by the DAO is indeed the same one you'd be looking at in different places. So once that release is done and you have the ability to basically hash the build folder for an application and produce this string of characters that is the hash, and repeatably be able to produce that, what that enables is anybody in the DXdao community, you don't have to have voting power even, can deploy that build folder to IPFS, right? So the Interplanetary file system, it's easy to forget what that actually stands for because it's sort of this crazy name, but it is paired with Filecoin. It's by the same project, Protocol Labs, run by the same guy I'd already mentioned earlier, Juan Benet, who was giving that talk at the Web3 Foundation. So it's a cool piece of technology which allows people to store data and information in a decentralized way. So anybody can take the application, put it on IPFS. You have an IPFS hash that is basically the pointer to that application. And now somebody can take that hash and go to the DXdao governance and make a proposal with that hash saying, hey, DXdao, I propose that the content hash on omen.eth, so there's a content hash field on ENS, I propose that field is updated to this IPFS hash so that now the omen.eth ENS domain name is actually pointing to the updated application. So this can actually be done via a proposal to the DXdao, right? And this, when those proposals pass, they get executed on Ethereum, and the omen.eth content hash is then updated, right? So it's in this way that DXdao actually owns its products and deploys and updates its products as well. And then where we are today in terms of browsing, these dApps that are controlled in this way is not ideal. We're relying on a service run by the ENS team called the .link service. So basically you can type in omen.eth and then another dot and then the word link, and they are resolving these ENS IPFS hashes to your web browser. Another way to do it is if you're signed in with Metamask, you can just type in omen.eth, and Metamask will actually take you to do the resolving for you and take you to the application. But when you use just Metamask, the problem we have is you end up with this string that includes like the IPFS hash and maybe some other characters, and it's not easily recognizable. And that is a problem. Why? Because of easy verifiability, right? So like if you want the whole point, one of the key points of the web is to share links. And if you have your users sharing kind of unrecognizable links, that is just dangerous, right? That's generally dangerous because it would be more likely that an attacker could spoof, could create another application that does something malicious, but it looks kind of close enough. They could go into your chat servers, your Discord, Telegram, etc., and then post this and try to convince people to use it and use it. So that's why it's really important to have this recognizable, concise, and verifiable domain name, right? Like so, omen.eth, pretty simple, easy. You can go to ENS and you can see that DXdaw's address actually owns it. So yeah, the UX around a lot of this is still clunky, but this is the process that DXdao is using, and I think is pushing the envelope on deployment of decentralized applications. So I just wanted to kind of basically close here. Like I think I've given a little bit of an overview of how things work today, but what's kind of up next, right? So I mentioned that when developers of DXdao finish their development work, they do a release on GitHub, right? But GitHub is owned by Microsoft, a centralized intermediary. We'd like to do something different there. Luckily, Git itself, the software, is very naturally decentralized, right? It's on the individual people's computers, but a lot of the collaboration and the interaction with the actual open source software is happening on GitHub, and that's centralized. So there's a project called Radical. Their website is radical.xyz. They launched at the end of last year. DXdao is participating closely with them in what they're calling their Cedar program to kind of develop alongside them and use their technology. It's a decentralized version of GitHub. And yeah, so basically allows you to upload Git repositories onto their network, onto their decentralized network, and share them, etc. there. So not only is the infrastructure just more decentralized than GitHub, the other really cool thing that is very important to DXdao that we get out of this technology is the DAO itself will be able to control updates to that repository, will be able to control contributors, etc., right, through the consensus mechanism, right? So an address on chain on Ethereum that represents this organization with hundreds of voting members, right, can now control this code sharing platform. So that's really powerful, and I think that is something to pay attention to, right? Like enabling decentralized organizations that are internet native, not tied to a specific geography, global in nature, to actually own and control their software and who has access to updating it, right? I think that's a super powerful concept, and one that I think we are going, that capability, that feature, I think we're going to see expand to basically everything we do on Web 2 today that might be controlled by a traditional organization, right? Everything from social media accounts to marketplaces, et cetera, that all DAOs are going to need to be able to interact with these. So Radical's a great project to check out, see what they're doing. Almany's a lesser known one. They don't have a token. They received a grant from DXdao, and they are working on a decentralized blogging platform. So, one of the problems that DXdao has is it's very important to produce articles and reach your community in that way. And there are popular platforms like Medium, which are centralized and require somebody to have an account, and they're controlled by a centralized company, right? And so same issues that GitHub has, centralized company backing it, no way for the DAO to control it, right? So those are the things that I think that the Web3 movement is all about, is like changing the way that works, decentralizing it, enabling internet native organizations to control it, right? So that's why DXdao gave Almany a grant to work on this type of thing. And so that's another cool project to check out. Now, I think this is, these are projects that are active now that people are working on. I think this is just the beginning. They're, like I said in an earlier slide, Web3 is sort of about doing to all of these Web 2 services what Bitcoin did to money, right? So like we're going to see decentralized versions, I think, of a lot, if not all of the Web 2 services. And so we haven't really seen much traction in this yet, but I think some of these things that DeFi projects are utilizing will spearhead this direction, right? DXdao has an actual like acute need for some of these services, right? So that's why DXdao is willing to participate, support, whether it's just through contributors using and giving feedback to the projects, or actual financial support through grants or investment. DXdao is very interested in these technologies. So yeah, so with that, I think I will close here. I shared some links, I think are in the talk description. I have the same links on the next slide, but I just want to point out that DXdao is looking for new contributors, and in particular has a need for developers. So developers who are familiar with blockchain, with Ethereum, Solidity, with Web3 development, or just experienced Web 2 developers who are looking to get into Web3. And at the moment, I would say DXdao is looking for more experienced developers, and that's sort of a function of how busy everybody is trying to meet the upcoming product goals. But I imagine as the organization matures, DXdao will be recruiting kind of across the experience spectrum, from people coming straight out of school or just learning development for the first time. And then the other way you could potentially build with DXdao is maybe you don't want to work as a contributor with DXdao, but you have your own project. If your own project is sort of in the spirit of what this talk has been describing, if you think it solves some of the problems that DXdao or other DAOs may have operationally, right? So any of these services that we're kind of forced to use centralized services for, or products in the decentralized finance space, that's something that could be very interesting to DXdao. There is, right now it's $1 million has been allocated to DX Ventures, which is basically doing investments. And it's also possible that DXdao may do a grant if it's the right type of project, et cetera. And this is something that's been emerging. It's just to touch on the treasury a bit. DXdao has most of its treasury in Ether that was raised last year. The value fluctuates with the value of Ether, but last I checked, it was about $70 million. So DXdao has a good amount of runway. It's also executing a buyback to kind of make sure some of that appreciation of the treasury is given to the DXD holders, the token holders. But there's also, the primary purpose of that treasury is to fund development work on DXDAO's products. So, yep, so definitely check DXdao out, and here are the links. I think they're also in the talk description. And yeah, we would look forward to welcoming any of you all to the DXdao community. Now, that's basically it for my talk. Is there questions? You said no questions here.
Thanks a lot for your talk, John. I can see that DXdao community is really active. There are some comments in the sidebar, but I don't see any questions. So yeah, if anyone has a question, that's the moment to ask. But I think you are in touch with them on your own channels a lot. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I know some of these guys.
Yeah. Oh, we have a question.
So the question is, how are you working with Swarm? So the short answer is Dxdow hasn't done anything with Swarm. And I actually don't know a lot about Swarm, but I do understand that it is a storage project, I believe, but I don't have much to say, don't know much about it. Oh, sorry, so clarifying that the question means radical with Swarm, and I guess I'm not quite sure how Swarm is important for Radical, but I could talk a little bit about how DXdao is working with Radical. So a few of the contributors are part of this Cedar program that Radical is running, and so basically all those of us who are doing that are trying to find ways to use their software, give them feedback, be active in the Radical community. And so the main things are uploading DXdao repositories that are currently being hosted on GitHub to the Radical network, giving them feedback, giving the Radical team feedback on how that works. And also we're in the middle of an effort to set up DXdao as a Radical organization. So like I said, it would help DXdao actually control the repositories and who has access and that kind of thing.
Okay, I don't think we have any other questions. So yeah, John, thanks a lot for your time.
Of course, thanks for having me.
My pleasure. I hope to see you again soon.
All right, take care, both.